According to the 2020 to 2025 US Dietary Guidelines, my health will not be adversely affected if I moderate my alcohol consumption to 2 drinks daily. For women, that's 1 drink. And it's not a sexist conspiracy, by the way. Women have less water in their bodies in proportion to men overall, and they break down alcohol at a slower rate. Science. But all of this could change because the US government is funding research that would alter the guidelines to recommend total abstinence from alcohol as the only healthy choice. You're watching the Consumer Manifesto by the Consumer Choice Center, and I'm about to explain why this is happening, how an anti-alcohol temperance fraternity started in the 19th century is influencing the process, and why we all need to demand more transparency on how these guidelines are being developed. Every 5 years, the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, updates the US Dietary Guidelines to reflect the most up-to-date peer-reviewed science on what is healthy. These guidelines shape our understanding of what's good, what's bad for eating and drinking. Examples include keeping added sugars and saturated fats down to less than 10% of your daily calories, breastfeeding for the first 6 months of an infant's life before introducing nutrient-dense foods. Vegetables are good, candy is bad.
You want to fry?
We know these things somewhat instinctively, but government dietary guidelines provide a sort of societal seal of approval on what we feel to be true about what is good for us and bad for us, or neutral. Still, the US Dietary Guidelines are a minefield of scientific debate, industry input, and outright activism. Culture war is always trying to get into this process. That's how we ended up with 13 years of total prohibition on alcohol from 1920 to 1933 in the United States. Science was downstream from culture, and a moral movement against drinking managed to take control of Congress. A few weeks ago, a bipartisan group of over 100 congressmen raised concerns about the integrity of an ongoing study within HHS on alcohol. I'll keep this pretty simple. There are 2 government studies of alcohol currently happening. The first review is being conducted by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, or NASEM. It was congressionally mandated and funded. The second review is being done by the Interagency Coordinating Committee on the Prevention of Underage Drinking within HHS. And it has no congressional mandate and has been marred by issues such as unaddressed conflicts of interest, a lack of outside input, and very little public transparency with a closed-door review process. There are literally panel members on this board whose work has been funded in the past by international anti-alcohol activist groups, and all panel members were picked in a secretive process that Congress is only now learning of. This letter from the bipartisan group pretty much hit the nail on the head when it said that it's hard for the public to trust any recommendations that come out of this study. Yeah, no kidding. Remember what I said about that 19th century temperance group influencing the HHS study? That's Movendi, a group that for over 100 years was called the International Organization of Good Templars, until a recent rebrand. Now, since then, Movendi has become a partner of the World Health Organization. You might remember some of the World Health Organization's greatest hits, such as helping with China's cover-up of COVID-19's origins, as well as labeling red meat a possible cause of cancer. Yeah. Since aligning with Movendi on alcohol abstention, Western nations have suddenly been hit with a new wave of prohibitionist thinking, leading Canada, as well as Ireland, to consider new health guidelines in 2023 into 2024 that would discourage some of the world's most prolific enjoyers of alcohol from touching beer, wine, or liquor at all. Now, the Canadian guidance would potentially be no level of alcohol is safe for human consumption, and messages of moderation and responsible drinking would be a thing of the past. After this was brought up in Canada, the US took notice. George Koob, director of the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, suggested that the United States consider adopting those same guidelines being reviewed in Canada. And so this year, the Biden administration seemingly opened the door to the World Health Organization's recommendations, and HHS started its own duplicative, expensive study. And remember, this is happening under the umbrella of the Coordinating Committee on the Prevention of Underage Drinking, not adult drinking. So a government body whose mission is to keep alcohol out of the hands of teenagers and reduce underage drinking. A mission which has largely been successful. Among 12 to 20-year-olds, there are 3 million fewer underage drinkers and nearly 2 million fewer binge drinkers than there were in 2024, just a decade ago. A very similar trend is happening with smoking rates, which have fallen worldwide dramatically with young people. Gen Z just doesn't drink as much, and generally are more risk-averse overall with all sorts of activities. Hollywood sweethearts Tom Holland and Zendaya are a pretty good example of this consumer trend away from alcohol and toward non-alcoholic alternatives. Dry January is pretty much becoming a half-of-the-year ordeal for these consumers. And that's great. That's what consumer choice is all about. Having the option to make lifestyle decisions. But government, which should be driven by scientific rigor and transparent peer review, seems to be motivated now to blur the lines between risk and safety. I just want to be crystal clear. Consuming literally any liquid besides clean water carries a risk profile. But risk is not reflective of safety. Swimming is a risky activity, but if you know how to swim proficiently, it's quite safe. The same has always been true for alcohol consumption. And yet, the US government and HHS are going backward on this. Prohibition was a stain on good governance in the United States, and we should all be aware that this kind of policymaking could happen again if we're not vigilant. In the end, public health guidelines are the most efficient when they are transparent and based on rigorous science, not activism. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Should the US discourage all alcohol consumption as a matter of health, or maintain moderate guidelines based on individual responsibility? Share your opinions in the comments below. I'm Stephen Kent, and you've been watching the Consumer Manifesto. Can I have a drink now? Okay. Cheers.